I don't care whose it is. Tow it right now. Those 7 words. There, one decision. That was all it took for Karen Whitmore to walk straight off the edge of a cliff she didn't even know was there. Because the man sitting quietly inside that dealership, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just opened a folder and everything Karen had spent 7 years building collapsed in about 90 seconds flat. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. There is a particular kind of person who mistakes a job title for a crown. Plug into a room and immediately calculate who beneath them they can remind of their place. Speak a little too loudly. They carry their authority the way a bad actor carries a prop with both hands thrust forward, making sure everyone in the room can see it. Karen Whitmore was exactly that kind of person. She was 51 years old, operations manager of Silver Creek Auto Plaza in Cedar Ridge, Arizona, and for the better part of 7 years, she had operated that commercial property as though it were a small kingdom and she were its queen. Cedar Ridge wasn't a big city. It was the kind of town where people knew each other's names, or where the same families had run the same businesses for generations, or a handshake still meant something. Silver Creek Auto Plaza sat at the north edge of town, a sprawling commercial strip that housed motorcycle dealerships, repair shops, a breakfast cafe that opened at 5 in the morning, a supplier that had been there since 1987, and a handful of other small businesses that had scraped and survived through every economic storm the last 3 decades had thrown at them. These were working people, real people. People who woke up before sunrise and went to bed after sunset and didn't complain about it because that was just the life they had chosen and they were proud of it. Then there was Karen. Karen arrived every morning in a pearl white luxury SUV, parked in the spot closest to the main office, the spot that had an unofficial but universally understood designation as her spot, and stepped out carrying a leather-bound tablet case, a stainless steel travel mug, and an expression that suggested she had already found 17 things wrong with the day before she'd even finished her first sip of coffee. They wore blazers, always, even in the 102-degree Arizona summers. Blazer said, "I am a professional. I'm not one of you." She had a voice that carried, not because she was naturally loud, but because she had learned consciously or not that volume was a form of control. When Karen spoke, people stopped what they were doing, out of respect, out of survival instinct, because Karen Whitmore had a gift for finding the one thing that could hurt you and using it at the exact moment it would land hardest. Jimmy Tran knew that better than almost anyone. Jimmy ran a Vietnamese sandwich shop at the far end of the plaza, a tight little space that smelled like fresh bread and lemongrass and had somehow become the unofficial lunch destination for half the mechanics in Cedar Ridge. Jimmy had been at Silver Creek Auto Plaza for 4 years. It wasn't fancy. His equipment was old. His refrigerator made a grinding noise that he'd been meaning to get fixed for 6 months. And showed up one Tuesday morning in March, tablet in hand, informed Jimmy that his refrigerator noise constituted a noise pollution violation under the plaza's operational guidelines, a document the way herself had written, revised, and reissued 11 times in 7 years, each revision somehow containing new rules that conveniently applied to whoever had recently annoyed her. "There's a $400 fine." "Here, Mr. Tran," she said, tapping something on her tablet without looking up. Within 10 business days, Jimmy stared at her. "It's a refrigerator. It's inside my shop. Nobody can even hear it from outside." "I could hear it," Karen said. "It's documentation. You were standing inside my shop with your ear next to it." Karen smiled. A warm smile. 10 business days, Mr. Tran. Jimmy paid the fine because he thought it was right, because he couldn't afford to fight it. As Karen had made it very clear very early in his tenancy, fighting her was more expensive than surrendering to her, and she had the documentation to make his life complicated in ways that would take months to untangle. That was how Karen operated. Not with brute force, but with paperwork, with processes, with the thousand small levers of bureaucratic power that most people don't even realize exist until someone is pulling them against you. Okoye, who ran the breakfast cafe, told anyone who would listen that Karen had once fined her for having a chalk sandwich board on the sidewalk, a sandwich board that had been there for 3 years, before Karen apparently decided it violated a signage ordinance. Photographer had a photograph of Karen standing beside the sandwich board at the plaza's Community Appreciation Day 2 summers prior. Karen told Sandra the photograph wasn't relevant to the current violation. Sarah paid the fine. Eddie Garza, who ran one of the auto repair bays, had been fined for having oil stains on the concrete outside his bay door. Auto mechanic at an auto plaza. The oil stains were, Eddie pointed out, a fairly expected feature of his occupation. Karen told him the aesthetic standards of the property were non-negotiable. Eddie paid the fine. This was the ecosystem Karen had built, a landscape of fear and resignation, where the smallest business owners, the ones with the least margin, the least leverage, the least ability to absorb a surprise expense, lived under constant low-grade anxiety about what rule they might be unknowingly breaking and when Karen would show up to enforce it. And Karen loved it, not because she was a monster, though some of the tenants had certainly used that word in the privacy of their own break rooms and kitchen tables. For Karen, control was the thing that made her feel safe. In a home where everything felt unstable, the rules changed without warning, where the person in charge was unpredictable and powerful, and there was nothing you could do about it. She had spent her adult life ensuring she would never be on the receiving end of that kind of powerlessness again. The problem was that she'd gone so far in the other direction that she'd become the very thing she feared. She just couldn't see it. And on the morning of September 14th, blindness was going to cost her everything. It started the way most disasters do, with something small. Karen pulled into her spot at 7:42 in the morning. Plaza was just beginning to wake up. Sandra's Cafe had been open since 5. Their repair bays were starting to warm up. The parts supplier was doing his morning inventory. A quiet, purposeful hum of people who had real work to do was already filling the air. Karen stepped out of her SUV. She took one sip of coffee. Later, she looked toward the motorcycle dealership, and she stopped. Directly in front of the dealership's main entrance, not on the sidewalk, not blocking anything, not illegally positioned in any technical sense, not exactly where Karen had decided in the architecture of her personal authority should park anything without her approval, was a motorcycle. Not just any motorcycle. This was a machine that demanded attention the way a thunderstorm demands attention. It was a custom Harley-Davidson jack, all of it, and the frame, and the fenders with chrome, that caught the early morning Arizona sun and threw it back at you like a dare. Their seat was hand-stitched. The handlebars had been custom-fitted. There, on the side of the tank, were markings that told anyone who knew anything exactly what kind of man rode this bike. Angels. Karen didn't know what she didn't know. She didn't know who owned it. She didn't know why it was there. She didn't know what relationship this motorcycle might have to the dealership in front of which it was parked. She didn't ask. She didn't investigate. She just pulled out her phone. This is Karen Whitmore, operations manager at Silver Creek Auto Plaza. I need a vehicle removed from the property immediately. On the other end of the line, Spaspitcher asked for the location and description of the vehicle. Karen gave them. There was a pause. Ma'am, can you describe the markings on the vehicle more specifically? It's a black Harley-Davidson with some club markings on it. I don't know exactly what they say. I didn't go close enough to read them. Others need it towed. This is private property, and the vehicle is in violation of our access policies. Another pause. I'll send a driver over. But I want to note for the record, ma'am, that if the vehicle belongs to a... I don't need notes, Karen said. I need a tow truck. Can you do that, or should I call someone else? We'll send someone right over. Karen ended the call. She finished her coffee. She felt, as she often did when she had just made a decisive administrative move, a particular sense of satisfaction. Not happiness. Exactly. More like the feeling of a machine operating exactly as it was designed to operate. Order had been disturbed. order would be restored. Their Karen would be the instrument of that restoration. That was what she was there for. What Karen didn't see, what she never thought to look for, was the figure seated inside the dealership showroom, visible through the large glass front windows if you were paying any attention at all. Sitting at a table near the window, papers spread in front of him, a cup of coffee at his elbow, completely calm, completely still. This kind of stillness that doesn't come from an activity from a person who has learned over many years and many difficult situations that stillness is its own form of power. It was Ryan Callahan. He was 48 years old. He had sandy blonde hair that was starting to go silver at the temples, a face that had seen weather, not hardship, but experience. The difference being that hardship leaves a person looking worn, experience leaves a person looking settled. Ryan looked settled, wearing dark jeans, heavy work boots, and a black leather vest over a plain gray shirt. The vest had patches on it, the kind of patches that meant something specific to people in the know, the patches that Karen had seen from a distance and immediately categorized as problem without stopping to ask what kind. Ryan was reviewing expansion documents. Specifically, he was reviewing the terms of an acquisition he had completed 11 days earlier. Acquisition that included, among other things, the entire Silver Creek Auto Plaza, commercial property. All of it. The cafe where Sandra made her coffee. Her pear bays where Eddie got his oil stain violations. Jimmy's sandwich shop. The parts supplier. Every square foot of the parking lot. Every lease. Every contract. Every employment agreement currently in effect. The employment agreement for one Karen Whitmore, operations manager. Ryan didn't know Karen yet. He was about to call. He heard the call before he saw it happen. Not Karen's call. He hadn't been close enough for that. But his phone had rung about 20 minutes before Karen arrived. And his general manager, a woman named Teresa, who had worked with Ryan for 9 years and had excellent instincts about trouble, had left a voicemail. Ryan, heads up, I got a call from one of the mechanics over at Bay 4. He says the operations woman, Karen something, was in the parking lot this morning giving his customers dirty looks while they waited. He says she's been in a mood all week. Just thought you should know before you go in today. Also, your bike looks incredible, by the way. Ryan had smiled at that last part, and the Harley rebuilt over the summer. A full custom job. He didn't bring it out every day, but today felt like a good day for it. He set the voicemail aside and went back to his paperwork, just studying the tenant files. Specifically, he was going through the complaint history, because when Ryan acquired a new property, the first things he did was look at what the tenants had been experiencing. Not the official documentation from management's side, the actual complaints, the requests that had gone unanswered, fines that had been issued, the patterns. The pattern at Silver Creek was not subtle. There are 37 formal complaints from tenants in the past 18 months. 22 of them involving fines that Ryan's legal team had flagged as potentially unenforceable. 11 complaints specifically naming the operations manager. Turnover rate among small business tenants that was nearly double the industry average count for commercial properties of this type and size. Ryan had seen this before. He'd bought 4 other properties over the years, had come with what he privately called a gatekeeper problem, a middle manager who had confused access to authority with the actual possession of it, and who had spent years using that confusion to make people smaller. He circled Karen's name in his notes, not out of malice, out of professional necessity. He was going to have a conversation with this woman. He'd been planning to do it that afternoon in a formal context, are present, so everything was documented and above board. He hadn't planned on having it in a parking lot, but life rarely follows the plan. He heard the tow truck before he saw it. Diesel engine, the hydraulic lift system cycling up, particular mechanical voice of heavy equipment arriving with purpose. Ryan knew those sounds. Up from his papers and through the showroom window and saw a flatbed truck pulling into the Silver Creek parking lot. His thought was, someone broke down. His second thought, about 3 seconds later, When he saw the driver step out and begin walking toward his bike, something considerably less calm. Ryan stood up. Run, he didn't shout. He folded his papers, tucked them under his arm, picked up his coffee, and walked toward the front door of the showroom at the pace of a man who has all the time in the world and knows exactly what he's about to do with it. He pushed through the door and stepped outside. The morning air hit him warm already, the way Arizona mornings are in September, with the promise of serious heat building behind the sun. He could see Karen standing about 30 feet away, near the edge of the parking lot, arms crossed, watching the truck driver approach the Harley with the particular expression of a person supervising something they believe they have complete authority over. For a heavy-set man in his 40s named Doug, Ryan would later learn, had stopped about 6 feet from the motorcycle. He was looking at it carefully, looking at the markings. He hadn't touched it yet. Ryan walked toward them at the same easy pace. Karen hadn't noticed him emerge from the showroom. She was focused on the driver. "What are you waiting for?" she called to Doug. "Sit up." Doug looked at her, then back at the bike. He moved his cap, ran his hand over his head. "Ma'am," he said, "I just want to confirm. Do you know who owns this motorcycle?" "I don't care who owns it," Karen said. "In a restricted access zone, and I am the operations manager of this property, and I am directing you to tow it." "Right," Doug said slowly. "It's just these markings here indicate this bike belongs to a senior member of—" "I know what the markings mean," Karen said, which was not entirely true. "And I'm telling you that this is private property, and the vehicle is in violation." Ryan was close enough now. "Sir?" "Hey," he said, not loud, just one word. But something in his voice, the absolute absence of agitation in it, quietness that is the opposite of weakness, made both Karen and Doug turn around at the same moment. And Karen looked at him. She took in the leather vest, patches, the calm expression. She had already decided who he was. "You need to move your vehicle," she said. "You're in a restrict—" "That's my bike," Ryan said. "And I'm Ryan Callahan." He paused one beat, just long enough. "On this dealership," Karen blinked. "I'm sorry?" "This dealership," Ryan said, gesturing toward the building behind him. "I own it. About 11 days now. And before you ask, yes, bike is parked on my property. So technically you're asking this gentleman," he nodded toward Doug, "to tow my vehicle off my own property." Karen's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. That's not possible. "This dealership is owned by—" She stopped. She was reaching for a name and finding, finally, that she wasn't entirely sure she could produce it with confidence. The truth was, she had never paid close attention to the ownership structure of the properties she managed because she had never felt she needed to. "Frank DiMaggio," Ryan said helpfully. "Frank sold it to me 11 days ago. Closed on the 3rd of the month. It's all recorded with the county." Karen stared at him. For the first time in what felt like years, she didn't know what to say. Doug, the tow truck driver, was already backing toward his vehicle, recognizing with the professional intuition of a man who has been in awkward situations before that this particular job was over. Doug started. "You're good, Doug," Ryan said. He'd read the name off the driver's uniform. "Thanks for being careful with it." Doug looked at Ryan, at Karen. Then he got in his truck. They stood there, Karen and Ryan, in the parking lot of Silver Creek Auto Plaza, in the warming September morning air, while the tow truck backed out and departed. Ryan was recalibrating. Ryan could see it happening. He had dealt with enough people in enough high-pressure situations to recognize when someone's internal narrative was being forcibly edited, when the story they had been telling themselves collided with a hard fact. And the collision required some emergency processing. They waited. He was good at waiting. "Mr. Callahan," Karen finally said, "apologize for any misunderstanding. I wasn't aware of the recent ownership change. I was simply enforcing the property's operational policies I've been responsible for maintaining for 7 years to require that—" "Karen," Ryan said. She stopped. About the way he used her name, not unkind, direct, with the quiet authority of someone who is not performing authority, but simply possessing it, stopped her mid-sentence. "No," he said. "I've read the files." Karen felt something she rarely felt. Fear. Not the theatrical fear of a confrontation she was losing, A deeper, colder thing, the fear of being truly seen. Of having someone look past the clipboard and the blazer and the tablet and see what was actually there. Files, she asked, and her voice had lost something. Some of the practice control she usually carried in it. That files, Ryan said. The complaint records. Fine history. He looked at her steadily. 37 complaints in 18 months. And 22 fines that my legal team thinks are going to be hard to defend. And this morning, before I'd even had a second cup of coffee, the tow truck for my motorcycle. Karen's jaw tightened. I was doing my job. Were you? Ryan said. It wasn't aggressive. It was genuinely curious. Because the operations manager's job, to understand it, is to make the property run smoothly, to support the tenants, to make sure the businesses here can actually do business. He paused. Is that what you've been doing? Karen said nothing. And in that silence, in that particular uncharacteristic silence from a woman who had wielded words like weapons for 7 years, the answer was louder than anything she could have said. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away at the plaza, at Sandra's Cafe and Eddie's Repair Bay and the parts supplier's loading dock and all the small working enterprises that filled this space. I'm going to spend some time getting to know this property, he said quietly. Getting to know the people here, understanding what they need. He glanced back at Karen. I'd like your help with that. I'd like this to be a conversation, a confrontation. Karen felt something tighten in her chest. Not sure if it was gratitude or terror. Of course, she said. Voice was careful now. Professional. The mask back in place, sitting differently the way a mask sits when the face beneath it has changed shape. Ryan nodded. Good. Let's start this afternoon. My office, 3 o'clock. He picked up his coffee, still warm, somehow still calm, and walked back toward the dealership. Karen stood in the parking lot, alone. The sound of the tow truck had long since faded. The morning moved around her mechanics, starting their engines. Hunter's Cafe, sending out the smell of fresh coffee, full of early customers pulling into the lot, the ordinary living machinery of a working day in full motion. Whitmore stood in the middle of all of it. And for the first time in 7 years, she had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. First, she should have gone inside. She should have gone to her office, opened her laptop, up the tenant files, started preparing for a 3 o'clock meeting that she now understood was going to be considerably more consequential than she had initially imagined. She should have done the sensible thing. But Karen was not, at worst moments, a sensible woman. She was a woman who, when threatened, attacked. And Ryan Callahan's calm, his patience, his refusal to be rattled by her Karen's nervous system, had processed all of that not as a reason to step back, but as a provocation, as a challenge to the authority she had spent 7 years constructing. Without her phone, she called the property management company's regional director, a man named Philip Hayes, who had hired her, praised her efficiency for years, who had never looked closely enough at how she achieved that efficiency. She said, we have a situation. Philip Hayes was at his desk in Scottsdale when his phone rang. A careful man by nature, 57 years old, hair, the permanent slight squint of a person who spent too much time looking at spreadsheets in inadequate light. The portfolio of 17 commercial properties across the state of Arizona. Silver Creek Auto Plaza had, until 11 days ago, Karen, he said, I was actually about to call you. Did you know, Karen said, like any preamble, that Frank DiMaggio sold the Silver Creek property? Notifying me? Philip was quiet for a moment. Karen, I'm aware of the sale. I was informed last week. I was planning to reach out to all property staff this morning to brief them on the transition. This morning? Karen's voice went tight. Look, the new owner just tried to have me tow his motorcycle. I tried to have his motorcycle towed. I didn't know it was his. The point is, there was an incident and I handled it professionally. I think it's completely unacceptable that I wasn't briefed on an ownership change that directly affects my ability to... Karen, Philip's voice was careful. Careful in a way that Karen's well-developed instincts for interpersonal danger should have flagged immediately. Incident exactly, she told him. not entirely accurately. And Karen told was the version Karen in which the she had been the professional party throughout, enforcing reasonable policies, and the new owner had arrived without introducing himself. There had been confusion, and it was all really just a communication failure that could have been avoided if she had been properly informed. A bit listened. He was quiet for a long time after she finished, and he said, Ryan Callahan is not just the new owner of Silver Creek. His company also manages 3 of the other properties in my portfolio. We have a significant working relationship with him. Silence. Told me 20 minutes ago, Philip continued. Or you did. The silence on Karen's end deepened. He was professional about it, Philip said. He said he wanted to give me a chance to review the situation before he made any decisions. He shared some documentation, complaint records, fine history, other things. Philip, he's meeting with you at 3 o'clock today, Philip said. I think you should take that meeting very seriously. I always take my meetings seriously. Philip, that's never been the issue. Karen, the careful voice again. No, you've done good work for this company. I know you've managed that property efficiently and kept it organized, and I've always valued your professionalism. A pause. What Ryan shared with me this morning, I need to look into it more carefully. Well, I've done that. I need to ask you to go into that 3 o'clock meeting in a spirit of genuine openness. Genuine openness, Karen repeated. Yes. She stood in the parking lot. She had not moved, had been standing there this entire call in the September morning heat, and she looked at the dealership where Ryan Callahan had disappeared back into his paperwork and his coffee and his terrible calm. Fine, she said. Good, Philip said. She ended the call. She stood there another moment. Then Karen Whitmore, operations manager of Silver Creek Auto Plaza, went inside and began for the first time in 7 years to wonder whether she had made a very serious mistake. Sir. The answer, though she couldn't yet see the full shape of it, was yes. The mistake had not just been this morning. The mistake had been every morning for 7 years. Every fine she had issued that was more about power than policy. Every complaint she had dismissed because the person filing it didn't have the leverage to make her listen. A small humiliation she had handed out to people who were working too hard and sleeping too little and running on margins too thin to absorb another unexpected expense. Karen had built an empire in Silver Creek Auto Plaza. Empire, a mean one. And empires have a way of lasting exactly as long as the people building them remain in control. The moment that control shifts, the moment a new pair of eyes arrives and looks at the records and asks the simple, devastating question why, the architecture of that empire begins to reveal itself for what it always was. Power, just the shadow of power, cast by a person who was afraid. Ryan Callahan was not afraid, and he was at 3 o'clock. The dealership, at that moment, Ryan's phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend, a man named Brick, who was also a member of the Hells Angels and who had, that morning, gotten a call from Doug, the tow truck driver. The message read, heard you had some excitement this morning. You good? Ryan smiled and typed back, getting there. Come by later if you can. And the crew could be useful. He set the phone down. He looked at the tenant files. He circled 3 more names. They had a lot of work to do, and the day was only just beginning. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, standing in the parking lot, recalibrating her understanding of the morning, was that the man she had just tried to humiliate had spent the last decade building something she had never bothered to build. It's a business, not just a portfolio, a reputation for being the kind of person who, when he walked into a room, made people feel safer, not smaller. That's a different kind of power than the kind Karen had been practicing. It need a clipboard. It doesn't need a fine schedule. It doesn't need to speak loudly or threaten or document violations of noise ordinances involving refrigerators. It just needs to walk through the door. And Ryan Callahan had walked through the door of Silver Creek Auto Plaza. And nothing was ever going to be the same again. 3 o'clock was 6 hours away. Karen had no idea what was in those files. She was about to find out. Karen sat at her desk and stared at her computer screen without seeing it. It was unusual for her. Karen was not a woman who stared at things without seeing them. She was a woman who looked at everything with the sharp, cataloging attention of someone who has trained themselves to find the exploitable detail in any situation. Back in the foundation, the clause in the contract, the weakness in the argument. But right now, her brain was doing something it almost never did. It was running the morning back on a loop. Move that bike immediately. I own this dealership. I've read the files. That last one was the one that kept stopping her. But the first two, those were recoverable. In the story, she was still trying to tell herself about what had happened this morning. Parking violation was a reasonable action. The ownership confusion was an honest mistake. Anyone could have made it. The lack of notification from the management company was a legitimate procedural failure that she intended to document formally. I've read the files. That one she couldn't spin. Karen knew what was in those files. She had created most of them. She had written the complaints, issued the fines, generated the documentation that justified every action she had taken in 7 years of managing this property. And she had done it with the absolute confidence of someone who believed that as long as the paperwork was in order, the substance behind the paperwork was irrelevant. What she hadn't accounted for was a person smart enough to look at the pattern and ask the question she had never let anyone ask. Why 37 complaints in 18 months? 22 fines that a legal team was already questioning. Why was the tenant turnover rate double the industry average? Why were the small businesses at Silver Creek Auto Plaza, which should have been thriving in a town that needed them, quietly bleeding? Karen opened the tenant complaint file on her computer and not looked at it in months. She didn't need to. She knew what was in it because she had put it there, but now she read it with different eyes. Ryan Callahan's eyes, she supposed. With the eyes of someone who didn't already know the story behind each entry and was seeing only the entries themselves. Jimmy Tran, noise violation, refrigerator, $400. Iroquois, signage ordinance, sandwich board, $250. There's a aesthetic standards violation, oil stains. There's $300. Marcus Webb, the parts supplier who had been at Silver Creek longer than any other tenant, had been fined twice in the last year. There's once for having boxes stacked too near the loading dock. There once for a crack in his parking bay paint markings that he had. Karen's own notes, reported for repair 3 months earlier and been told by Karen to add it to the maintenance queue. Then she fined him for it. Karen sat back in her chair. She did not feel guilt. Not exactly. Guilt requires a certain kind of self-examination that Karen had spent most of her adult life constructing elaborate defenses against. What she felt was something colder and more immediate, of a person who has been very confident for a very long time and who is beginning their first time to question whether that confidence had a solid foundation beneath it. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. It was a text from Donna Mercer, who handled leasing at the management company's main office. It was 20 years Karen's junior, unfailingly cheerful in a way Karen had always found vaguely suspicious, and had been at the company for 3 years. The text said, "Hey Kay, heard there was some excitement at SC this morning? Everything's okay. Also heads up, I'm pulling all the tenant files for Silver Creek per Philip's request. I'm packaged up by noon. Let me know if you need anything." I read the text twice. Philip was pulling the tenant files. That meant Philip was doing exactly what Karen had hoped he wouldn't do. He was looking closely, accepting her version of the morning, not trusting, as he had always trusted before, that her documentation was self-evidently correct. He was reading the files the way Ryan had read them, looking for the pattern. Karen set her phone face down on the desk. At the clock, she looked at the clock. 8:47, 3 o'clock was 6 hours and 13 minutes away. She opened her bottom desk drawer and took out a legal pad. Her old habit from before she'd gone entirely digital, she still thought better on paper when she was under pressure. She wrote 2 words at the top of the first page in her sharp right handwriting, damage control. Then she paused. She wrote a second line. Or something else? She stared at those 4 words for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and made a call she had never expected to make. Jimmy Tran. Jimmy was behind his counter slicing bread when his phone rang. Saw Karen's name on the screen, and his stomach tightened. Always did. 7 years of conditioning had made his body treat Karen's name like a warning signal. The same low alert that a person feels when they hear a sound they associate with past pain. He considered not answering. Then he answered. Mr. Oh, Karen said. Her voice was different. He noticed it immediately. The way you notice when a piece of machinery that always runs loud suddenly drops in register. I was hoping I could come by the shop this morning. I'd like to speak with you about a few things. Jimmy looked at the phone, then at the bread he was slicing. What kind of things? He asked carefully. Kind for March, Karen said. The refrigerator situation. I've been reviewing some of our procedures, and I think there may be an opportunity to revisit how that was handled. Jimmy was very quiet. Sir, he said finally. Are you apologizing? A pause. Longer than it should have been, if the answer was a simple yes. I'm saying I'd like to have a conversation, Karen said. About it. Come at 10, he said. I'll have bread ready. He hung up. He stood behind his counter for a moment with the phone in his hand. Tones. Then he walked to the pass-through window that looked out toward the front of the plaza and looked at the motorcycle dealership across the lot. He had seen the tow truck arrive that morning. He had seen Karen standing in the parking lot. He had seen the man walk out of the dealership calm, measured, unhurried, and he had watched from his window as the tow truck reversed out of the lot and left without the motorcycle. Jimmy had not heard the conversation, but he had read the body language well enough to understand the broad strokes. Everything had changed this morning. Something significant. He didn't know yet what it meant for him, but for the first time in 4 years, he thought the sandwich board was going to stay outside the shop without incident. He wasn't wrong. Karen visited Jimmy at 10. He visited Sandra at 10:45. She stopped by Eddie Garza's repair bay at 11:15. The conversation was different in its details and identical in its essential quality. Then was doing something she almost never did, which was sit still in someone else's space, someone else's coffee in her hand, and listen. Perform listening. Actually listen. At Jimmy's shop, others sat on a stool at the counter and let him talk for 25 minutes about what the $400 fine had meant to him, practically how he'd had to defer a refrigerator repair for another 2 months because fine had eaten the budget he'd set aside for it, and then the refrigerator had failed entirely, and he'd lost $300 of product in one afternoon. He'd seriously considered leaving Silver Creek entirely, and had only stayed because his regulars were loyal and he didn't want to abandon them. Blair listened. At Sandra's cafe, she sat at the corner table, the same table where Sandra's morning customers had been sitting for years, drink coffee and reading the paper beneath the window that Sandra had decorated with a small hanging plant and a framed photograph of her grandmother who had taught her to cook, and she let Sandra tell her about the sandwich board and what it had meant. Not the $250 fine specifically, what it had meant to be told that the thing she had been doing for 3 years, the thing that had become part of the visual identity of her small corner of the world, was suddenly a problem, was suddenly wrong. It made me feel like none of it was really mine, Sandra said. It was just borrowing space in someone else's kingdom and I could lose it any time. Karen didn't say anything. Eddie Garza's bay, she didn't sit. Eddie wasn't the sitting down for a conversation type. While he worked, his hands under the hood of a Chevy pickup, his voice rising above the engine noise in the way mechanics' voices do when they've spent decades learning to communicate over machinery. He told Karen that the aesthetic violation fine had been the final thing. He'd already been considering whether to renew his lease. After the fine, he'd called 2 other commercial properties in the area to ask about availability. The reason I stayed is they didn't have the right bay size, Eddie said. He pulled something out of the engine, looked at it, put it aside. Luck of the draw. Nothing you did kept me here. Karen said, I know. Eddie looked up from the engine. That was the answer he hadn't expected. Right then, he said, and went back to work. She was back at her desk by noon. Her legal pad, under damage control and or something else? She had been adding notes throughout the morning, not the clinical, policy language notes she normally took. Something different, something more like an honest accounting. Jimmy lost 300 in product because of deferred maintenance due to fine. There's leaving. Sandra emotional impact, sense of displacement, throwing space in someone else's kingdom. Eddie almost left, only stayed by accident. She stared at what she had written. Because Karen was a person who had trained herself to be honest about the things that served her interests, even when honesty was uncomfortable. Here she wrote one more line. This is what I built. She put the pen down, buzzed. A calendar reminder, 3:00 p.m. meeting. In Callahan, dealership office. She had 2 hours and 48 minutes. Up her computer, not to do damage control, not to prepare a defense, but to do something she should have done years ago, always found reasons to avoid. She started going through the fine history, every single one, looking not for justification this time, looking for truth. She was 3 years back in the records when someone knocked on her office door. "Come in," she said, not looking up. The door opened. She heard footsteps more than one set. She looked up. There's 2 men were standing in her doorway, not Ryan. These were men she didn't recognize, both in their 40s. They're both in leather, both wearing the kind of expression that was not hostile, but was very clearly not here to make small talk. The one on the left was built like someone had assembled him out of spare parts from larger things, broad shoulders. There's thick neck hands that suggested a career of physical work, a beard shot through with gray and eyes that were taking a quiet, thorough inventory of everything in the room. The one on the right was leaner, quieter in posture, with the kind of stillness that suggested not calm but control. The difference being that calm is something you feel, is something you maintain. "Ms. Whitmore?" the first man said. "There's," Karen said. "Ryan asked us to introduce ourselves." "Brick, this is Sal." He said it simply, without ceremony. "We've been helping Ryan at the property today. He wanted you to know we'd be around." Karen looked at them, back at her. "Helping with what?" she asked. Brick said. "Eddie Garza's got a compressor line that's been leaking for 3 months, waiting on a repair order that apparently got stuck in the queue. Trying to take care of it this afternoon." Karen opened her mouth. "Closed it. That's a maintenance request," she said. "Roddy. It goes through the management company's vendor system process." "Ryan approved it directly," Brick said, aggressively. "Just stating a fact, he's the owner. He can do that." Karen felt the shift again, that same sensation she'd felt in the parking lot this morning, the floor rearranging itself beneath her feet. Architecture of authority she had inhabited for 7 years, quietly acknowledging that it had a new landlord. "Right," she said. "Of course." Brick looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "Also wanted me to give you this," he said. He placed a folder on her desk. A threatening gesture. Just a document delivery. Matter of fact, the way you hand someone mail. Karen looked at the folder. "That Brick. What is it?" "He said you'd know what to do with it," Brick said. "Miss Whitmore." He turned and left. Rose followed without having said a word the entire time. Karen looked at the folder. Her name was written on the front in plain handwriting. Below her name, 2 words. "Review first." It. Inside were 12 pages. First page was a summary document, a brief, clear, professionally formatted overview of the findings Ryan's legal team had compiled during the due diligence process prior to the acquisition. Karen read it the way a person reads something they already know the broad contents of, but are seeing for the first time in its complete form. We identified what it called a pattern of operationally unjustifiable penalties applied to small business tenants over a 30-month period. That 22 of the 41 fines issued in that period fell into categories where the cited violation either did not appear in the property's governing lease documents, appeared in Karen's own internally created policy addenda that had not been formally approved by the property owner, or could not be substantiated by independent evidence. In plain language, she had been fining people for things she had made up rules about, anyone having ever told her she had the authority to make up those rules. She had assumed the authority, and no one had pushed back hard enough. or had the resources to push back hard enough for the assumption to be tested. Now Karen turned to page 2. It was a financial impact analysis by tenant, fine by fine. The total figure, summed across all contested actions over 30 months, was $64,850. Karen sat very still. $64,000. From the operating budgets of small businesses, from Jimmy Tran's bread shop and Sandra Okoye's cafe and Eddie Garza's repair bay and Marcus Webb's parts supply company, and 7 other small enterprises that were doing the hard work of building on something real in a town that needed them. And to page 3. Page 3 was a letter from Ryan, from the property's original owner, Frank DiMaggio, dated 4 months ago. In it, Frank expressed what he called his ongoing concern about the management climate at Silver Creek, that he had received several direct communications from tenants expressing fear of retaliation if they complained formally, and stated that he was seriously reconsidering the current management arrangement. Karen had never seen this letter. It had been sent to the management company's regional director, Philip Hayes. Philip had not forwarded it to her. To page 4. Page 4 was a forwarding confirmation, or a digital receipt showing that Philip had received Frank's letter. Below it, a second document, a note from Philip to the company's compliance officer, dated 3 days after Frank's letter. Please flag for review. Operations manager may need HR involvement. Karen set the page down. About the phone call that morning. Philip's careful voice. I need to ask you to go into that 3 o'clock meeting in a spirit of genuine openness, not because he was being diplomatic, because he already knew. He had known for 4 months. He had not told her. He had been waiting for what? For the situation to resolve itself? Frank to stop complaining? For the whole thing to quietly disappear into the filing system, where inconvenient truths go to die? Or had he been protecting himself, waiting to see which way it went before committing to an action that might make him complicit in whatever came next? Karen did not know. What she knew was that she was sitting in her office with 43 minutes until noon and 3 hours until a meeting that was going to define whatever next in her professional life. And she was holding a folder that showed her in clean black and white exactly what the last 7 years had actually looked like from the outside. Turned to page 5 and stopped. Page 5 was not a legal document, a financial analysis. It was not a letter from a former property owner or a compliance note from a regional director. It was a list, handwritten, in the same clean, plain handwriting as the note on the front of the folder. 12 items, each one a name, followed by a brief description. Jimmy Tran's sandwich shop, 4 years, family operation. But has been considering leaving. Sandra Okoye Cafe, this year's community anchor. Lost regular customers during COVID. Rebuilt has been considering leaving. Eddie Garza Auto Repair, 7 years, longest running bay tenant. Almost relocated last spring. Marcus Webb Parts Supply, 19 years. Original tenant. Has mentioned retirement but staying because of the community. She read all 12. Ryan had written them himself. A legal team, not an assistant. He had sat down with the tenant files in front of him, and he had made a list of the people. The violations, not the fine history, not the financial impact data. Karen felt something move in her chest. Guilt. She had already noted that guilt was something she had trouble accessing. Something else, something closer to recognition, like looking at a photograph of yourself taken without your knowledge and seeing, for the first time, how you actually look when you think no one is watching. Onto the last page, it was blank, except for one line in the same handwriting at the top. This is where you come in. She didn't move for a long time. Outside her office, she could hear the plaza moving through its morning. Her engine. The distant sound of Eddie's compressor, apparently now being repaired by 2 Hells Angels members who had shown up unannounced with tools. Sandra's cafe sending its regular coffee and toste smell through the building. A remarkable, essential soundtrack of people getting on with their days. Karen had spent 7 years in this building and had never quite heard it this clearly. Picked up her pen. She turned to a fresh page in her legal pad. A name, then another, then another. She was making her own list of violations, not of policy infractions, not of things that needed to be corrected in the documentation. List of conversations she needed to have, not because Ryan was watching, but because Philip had flagged her file for HR, not because her job was in jeopardy, probably was, and not because $64,000 in contested fines was a number that could end a career, which it might, but because Sandra Okoye had said something this morning that Karen couldn't stop hearing. It made me feel like none of it was really mine, like I was just borrowing space in someone else's kingdom. Karen had created that feeling, deliberately, systematically. Over 7 years, she had built a kingdom in Silver Creek Auto Plaza. And in that kingdom, everyone who wasn't her had lived with a low awareness that they were guests, that they could be removed. Their security was contingent on her goodwill. Her goodwill was contingent on their compliance. She had done that. She had done it because somewhere deep and old and heavily defended, well, she was terrified of being the person borrowing space in someone else's kingdom. She had spent so long running from that fear that she hadn't noticed she'd become the thing that caused it in others. She wrote Sandra's name on the list. Then she kept writing. But she was still writing when her door opened again without a knock. It wasn't Brick or Sal. It was Philip Hayes. But was not supposed to be at Silver Creek today. Office was in Scottsdale, 40 minutes away. Philip conducted most of his management oversight via email and phone call and quarterly in-person visits that were scheduled 3 weeks in advance and came with agendas. He was in her office, unannounced, at 12:14 in the afternoon. Karen looked at him. He looked at her. "Philip," she said. "I didn't know you were coming. I drove up after we talked this morning," he said. He sat down in the chair across from her desk without being invited, also unusual. Philip was a formal man in small ways. He usually waited for the invitation to sit. "I've been speaking with Ryan. Here, at the dealership, the past 2 hours." Philip set his own folder on her desk, and slimmer than the one Brick had brought. "Karen, I need to be direct with you about something." "All right," she said. "I've made some mistakes in how I manage the oversight of this property," Philip said. He did carefully, but he said it. "I received communications over the past year that I should have acted sooner. To acknowledge that before we talk about anything else." Karen stared at him. That was not a thing Philip had ever done in their 7-year working relationship. Such mistakes, volunteers' accountability. The Philip she knew smoothed things over, documentation tidy, kept his hands clean by keeping his distance from anything uncomfortable. "Hey," she said, "the situation with the tenants here is more serious than I allowed myself to see," Philip said. "Ryan's people have identified some exposure for the management company that I need to address immediately." He paused. Of addressing it involves decisions about the structure of operations here going forward. Karen felt the cold thing again. Arouse, the one that had showed up in the parking lot this morning. "What kind of decisions?" she asked. Philip looked at his folder, then at her. "Ryan has proposed keeping you on in a transitional capacity," he said, "through the end of the year, to assist with the remediation process, working through the contested fines, rebuild the tenant relationships, providing institutional knowledge during the transition." He paused. After that, the operations manager role would be eliminated. Ownership structure doesn't require a standalone position at that level. Property decisions will run through Ryan's team directly. The room was very quiet. Ern heard the compressor sound from Eddie's bay. Just now, probably. Running clean. "And if I decline the transitional role," she said, "then we'd need to discuss a formal separation," Philip said, "with the standard package." Karen looked at her legal pad. Remembers the list of names she had been building. Jimmy Trant, Airway, Eddie Garza, Marcus Webb, 8 others. "How long do I have to decide?" she said. "Ryan was hoping for an answer at 3 o'clock, Philip said. Karen nodded slowly. "I'll be at 3 o'clock, she said. Philip looked at her with an expression she didn't know how to read. And pity, it was something closer to a belated kind of honesty, the expression of a man who has realized he has been avoiding a clear view of something for too long. and is now looking at it steadily. Lynn, he said, for whatever it's worth, I know this isn't simple. I know how much of yourself you put into this place. I know, Karen said. I just wish he stopped. Started again. I wish some of it had been put in differently. He got up. He left. Karen sat alone in her office. She looked at her list. Then she did something she had not done in more years than she could accurately count. Let herself be wrong, not performed wrong, not apologized to manage the situation wrong. Actually, genuinely, completely wrong. She sat with it. It'd be as heavy as it was. Then she picked up her pen, kept writing. Across the plaza, at that same moment, Ryan Callahan was standing in Eddie Garza's repair bay, watching Brick reseal the compressor line with the practiced ease of someone who has been working with his hands since before he had any formal business sense to go with it. Oh, she took the folder, Sal said. He had been around long enough to notice things without making it look like he was noticing. Ryan said. You think she'll show at 3? Yes, Ryan said. Hesitation. Sal tilted his head. How do you know? Ryan watched Brick work for a moment, but the steady, confident movement of someone who knows what they're doing and doesn't need to announce it. She went to see Jimmy this morning, Ryan said. Her and Eddie. He paused. I didn't ask her to do that. It herself. Sal considered that. Doesn't mean she's changed, he said. No, Ryan agreed. It doesn't, but it means she's thinking. He looked toward the management office building, toward Karen's window. People who are only trying to save themselves don't start by going to see the people they hurt. Start by calling lawyers. Brick straightened up from the compressor. Well done. Good pressure. That's been a slow leak for months, should have been fixed in March. Add it to the list, Ryan said. Sure. Brick nodded. Ryan turned back toward the dealership. He had 2 hours and 41 minutes. And one more thing to do before 3 o'clock. He got out his phone and called the one person in this situation he hadn't yet spoken to. The person who had been at Silver Creek longer than anyone else. 19 years. The man who had watched this property through 3 owners, 2 recessions, 1 pandemic, and countless small indignities. According to every tenant Karen had spoken to this morning, the quiet emotional center of this small commercial world. Phone rang twice. Marcus Webb said, the voice on the other end. Steady, a little tired, the voice of a man who has been doing the same good work for 19 years and doesn't need to prove it to anyone. Someone said, this is Ryan Callahan. I just bought your building. I was hoping we could talk. A pause. I know who you are, Marcus said. Well, then you know why I'm calling. Another pause. Longer this time. Suppose I do, Marcus said. When? Are you in the shop? I'm always in the shop. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Ryan said. Already walking. Marcus Webb was 63 years old and had the handshake of a man who had never once in his life done anything halfway. Ryan felt it the moment they met, that particular kind of grip that isn't about strength, but about intention. Handshake of someone who means what they say and says what they mean and has been doing both long enough that it has become his physical habit. Callahan, Marcus said. Ryan said. Marcus looked at him for a moment, sizing him up exactly, more like calibrating, reading the gap between what a person presents and what they actually are. Marcus had been doing that for 19 years in this plaza, and he had gotten very good at it. Marcus said, please. They sat in Marcus's small back office, which was separated from the parts supply floor by a half wall and a door that had been propped open with a brake rotor for so long that the floor beneath it had worn a permanent arc. The office smelled like motor oil and old paper and the specific brand of instant coffee that men who grew up without a lot of money drink for the rest of their lives out of loyalty to the habit. He wrapped both hands around the mug Marcus set in front of him. 13 years, Ryan said. 19 years, Marcus confirmed. Across from Ryan in a chair that had been repaired at least twice, the armrests duct taped, the seat cushion replaced with something firmer. Marcus was not a man who threw things away when they could still be made to work. 3 owners before you. Frank DiMaggio for the last 11. Frank, a man named Costello who was never here. Costello, a partnership that dissolved in litigation. He said it like a man reading from a history he had been present for but had never been asked to narrate. You're the fourth. What were the others like? Ryan asked. Others. Marcus considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Flo didn't care what happened here, as long as the lease payments came in, he said. Partnership was too busy fighting each other to pay attention to the property. Frank cared, but Frank was tired. He bought this place when he was 52, thinking it would be an easy investment, and spent the next 11 years learning that nothing about commercial property is easy. He paused. He was a good man. He just lost track of what was happening on the ground. Because of Karen, Ryan said. It wasn't a question. Marcus looked at him. Partly, he said, partly because he let it happen. Karen couldn't have done what she did if someone had been paying attention. He said it without judgment. They're fact. That's the thing about gatekeepers. They only work when the people at the top aren't looking. Ryan nodded slowly. What did she do to you? He asked. Specifically. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He turned his mug in a slow circle on the desk. One full rotation. Then he looked up. 2 years ago, he said, I had a chance to expand. Oh, the unit next to mine came open, the tenant left. Didn't handle the fees. I went to Karen to ask about taking on the additional space. The financials, I had the customers. I had 19 years of perfect lease compliance. He paused. Orator. She told me the unit was already committed to another tenant. Gave me the name of a company I'd never heard of. Was it true? Ryan asked. Sure. I didn't find out until Frank was selling, Marcus said. As I asked Frank directly. He told me that unit had been empty for 14 months before it was eventually leased at a lower rate than I'd offered. A tenant who left after 8 months. Ryan was very still. Her never offered it to you. No, Marcus said. She didn't. Did she say why? She didn't say anything, Marcus said. I didn't know to ask. I took her at her word, and I moved on. He looked at his coffee mug. I'm 63 years old. That expansion would have meant I could have brought my son into the business. I'm giving him something to build on when I'm gone. A pause. Dramatic. Just honest. That's what she took from me. Not money. Not a square foot of real estate. The chance to build something that would last past me. The room was quiet. Ryan didn't say he was sorry. Not yet. Not because he wasn't. Because sorry was too small for what Marcus had just said. Like Marcus deserved better than words that were smaller than the wound. What would you do with it now? Ryan said. The expansion space. Marcus looked at him. Empty, Ryan said. The unit next to yours. That's the occupancy report. This morning. It's been empty for 3 months. Marcus set down his mug. Where does Ryan, he said carefully. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to have a different conversation than the one Karen had with you 2 years ago, Ryan said. I'm saying I'm interested in tenants who have been here, built something real, who have 19 years of proof that they're serious. He met Marcus's eyes. I'm saying the unit is available, and I'd like to know if you still want it. Marcus Webb, who had spent 63 years and 19 of them in this building, and who was not by any measure a man who showed his emotions easily in front of people he had just met, down at his desk. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. His voice was different. Not broken. Marcus Webb was not a man who broke. After. The way a voice goes when something that has been held tightly for a long time is, very carefully, set down. Yes, I still want it. Good, Ryan said. Details after 3 o'clock. He was back at the dealership by 1:15. Lisa, his general manager, was at the front desk with a stack of folders and the expression of a person who has been managing organized chaos for long enough that it no longer raises her heart rate. When? Ryan asked. Eddie's compressor is fixed, she said. Brick also found a water damage issue in the ceiling above Bay 3 that's been patched over but not repaired. He says it's probably been there for 2 years. Marcus Webb called the landlord insurance line to report it 3 times. Action taken. Ryan made a note. What else? Sandra Okoye wants to know if she can put the sandwich board back outside. Teresa looked up from her folders. Yes. Ryan nodded. Good. Also, Teresa set one folder on top of the others and slid it toward him. Philip Hayes left this for you before he went to see Karen. It's the formal management company response, the contested fine analysis. Ryan opened it. Read the first page, closed it. They're offering to refund the contested amounts, he said. Oh, 64,000, Teresa said. Split between the management company and the property's previous liability coverage. A release of claims from the tenants. We'll talk about the release, Ryan said. The tenants to have counsel before they sign anything. I'll make a note. Ryan looked toward the window, toward Karen's office building, visible across the lot. The folder, he said. I know. Brick told me. Teresa paused. He told me she went to see Jimmy, Sandra, and Eddie this morning. Her own. Yes. What do you make of that? Ryan thought about it for a moment. I think she's smarter than she let herself be for the last 7 years, he said. Oh, and I think this morning scared her into finally using it. Teresa tilted her head slightly. Enough? I don't know yet, Ryan said. 3 o'clock will tell me. Karen arrived at the dealership at 2:58. 3 o'clock. 2:58. 2 minutes early. A Karen thing. She had always believed that arriving precisely on time was a form of disrespect. But the professional moved ahead of schedule, that punctuality was the minimum, and early arrival was the standard. Her habits survived the earthquakes. The showroom was quieter than it had been that morning. Madam Harley was still parked out front. No one had moved it, and no one was going to. 2 of Ryan's team members were in the far corner of the showroom working on something mechanical. There, Teresa was at the desk, and Ryan was in the back office, visible through the open door. He looked up when Karen came in. "Mister," he said, "come in." Close the door. She did. The office was modest. A desk, 3 chairs, a whiteboard with numbers on it that Karen's eye automatically tried to decode before she stopped herself. Her window. On the desk, 2 folders, one of which Karen recognized as the one Brick had delivered that morning. There was new. She sat down. Ryan sat across from her. Did you read it? He said. All of it, Karen said. Last page? Yes, he looked at her, that steady and hurried look that she had found infuriating this morning, and now found something else, something she didn't have a clean word for. Comforting, but honest. The look of someone who is genuinely trying to see you rather than manage you. What made you an offer, Ryan said. Transitional capacity through the end of the year. Yes, that offer came from him, Ryan said. Not from me. Karen frowned slightly. I have a different offer, Ryan said. Here, the second folder. I've been building and managing commercial properties for 14 years, he said. Sure. In that time, I've learned that the operations layer, the people who are actually on the ground, who know the tenants by name, who understand the day-to-day machinery of a property, is the most important layer. And it's hardest to rebuild from scratch. He looked at her directly. You know this property. You know every lease, every tenant, every maintenance issue, every vendor relationship. That institutional knowledge has value. Karen was listening very carefully. Not offering you a transitional role, Ryan said. Offering you a real one, a permanent position on my operations team. Well, different structure than what you've had here. You'd report to Teresa, not to an absent regional director. There would be clear accountability standards. An authority you've had would be significantly curtailed and subject to review. He paused. It would be real work, meaningful work, the kind of work that actually helps the people in this plaza instead of what you've been doing. He said it without cruelty. Karen took a breath. Why, she said. Because this morning you went and saw Jimmy and Sandra and Eddie, Ryan said, without being asked, without anyone telling you to. You went because you knew you'd done something wrong and you wanted to look at it directly. He folded his hands on the desk. It's not nothing, Karen. That's actually pretty rare. Karen looked at the folder in front of him. Accountability standards, she said. Ryan almost smiled. He slid the folder across to her. Read them and tell me what you think, he said. Karen opened the folder, reading, and for the next 4 minutes, the office was very quiet, except for the sound of pages turning and outside the distant, clean sound of Eddie Garza's newly repaired compressor running the way it was supposed to run. On page 3, when her phone buzzed, it buzzed again and again. She glanced at the screen. 3 texts in rapid succession, all from the same number. A number she didn't immediately recognize, The preview of the first text showed 6 words that made her stop reading the accountability standards and pick up the phone. You need to call me. She looked at the number again. I didn't place it. She opened the message thread. First text, Karen. You need to call me. This is Derek Walsh. Karen felt the floor move. Derek Walsh was Karen's predecessor at Silver Creek Auto Plaza. Held the operations manager position for 2 years before Karen took over. He had left or been asked to leave. The circumstances had always been somewhat vague, and Karen had inherited his files, systems, his vendor relationships, and she had always assumed his failures. Derek Walsh had not spoken to Karen in 7 years. Second text I heard about this morning. Word travels fast in this town. I need you to understand something before that 3 o'clock meeting. Third text, Ryan Callahan knows something you don't. How you got this job. Call me. Karen stared at her phone. Ryan was watching her. Not intrusively, he was looking down at his own papers, giving her the privacy of the moment. But he was present. I was aware of his presence the way you're aware of someone in the room when something has just shifted significantly. I need 1 minute, she said. Take your time, Ryan said. Out of the office. She stood in the showroom, near the window that looked out on the parking lot. Custom Harley was still there. The September afternoon light was hitting the chrome and doing extraordinary things with it. Derek Walsh. He picked up on the first ring. And he said. His voice was not warm, but it was urgent. What is this about? She said. I'm in the middle of something. I know you are, Derek said. I'm calling. Karen, when you took over from me at Silver Creek, did anyone tell you the full story of why I left? I was told your performance wasn't meeting the owner's standards, Karen said carefully. That's the official version, Derek said. Here's the real one. I was pushed out because I refused to implement a fee structure that Frank DiMaggio's management company wanted to test. An aggressive penalty system designed to generate additional revenue from the tenants. It was ethically wrong and probably legally questionable. They thanked me for my feedback and showed me the door. A pause. 2 weeks later, they hired you. Karen was very still. They hired me because I was qualified, she said. But even as she said it, something cold was moving through her. They hired you because you were qualified and willing, Derek said. I want to be clear, I'm not saying you knew. I don't think you did. The fee structure you implemented in your first year, plus the addenda, Karen, those weren't your policies. They were policies the management company had been wanting to put in place for 2 years. They needed someone who would do it without asking the questions I asked. The cold thing was everywhere now. You're saying Philip Hayes, she started. I'm saying Philip Hayes gave you a structure and let you believe it was your own, Derek said. I'm saying that when this comes apart, and it's coming apart right now, isn't it? You need to understand that you were not the only person responsible for what happened at Silver Creek. Karen turned away from the window. In the office, visible through the glass, Ryan Callahan was reading. Patient, steady. The same quality of stillness he had had in the parking lot this morning when she had been trying to have his motorcycle towed. Are you telling me this now? She said to Derek. I felt guilty for 7 years, Derek said. I knew what they were doing when they hired you. I could have warned you. And because I was angry and I told myself it wasn't my problem. He paused. Because Ryan Callahan called me this morning. Karen's hand tightened on the phone. Called you. He's been doing his homework, Derek said. He found the original policy proposal documents in Frank's files. Then found the correspondence between Philip and the management company's board from 7 years ago. He knows the fee structure wasn't organically yours. A pause. I had to know if I'd testify to that if it came to a formal process. And will you? Yes, Derek said. Another pause. Karen, Ryan Callahan is not your enemy. I know this morning probably didn't feel that way. One who used you, who gave you a structure designed to extract money from vulnerable tenants and then let you take all the responsibility for it, that person is Philip Hayes. And his company. And you need to walk back into that office and tell Ryan everything you know. Karen stood in the showroom of a motorcycle dealership with the September afternoon coming through the windows and the chrome of a custom Harley throwing light across the floor. and 7 years of her professional life, rearranging themselves into a completely different shape than the one she had always believed they held. About the policy addenda she had written. But she had written. She thought about the first year. Philip had been so encouraging, so complimentary about her efficiency, or so enthusiastic about the fee structures she was implementing. Remember, she had believed that was because she was good at her job. She had been good at her job. The job had just been a different job than the one she thought she was doing. Look, she said. Good luck, he said. All right, I mean that. She hung up. She stood there for another 10 seconds. As he walked back into the office, she sat down at Ryan Callahan across the desk. You called Derek Walsh this morning, she said. But Ryan met her eyes. Yes, he said. You knew about the policy proposal documents. I found them in Frank's files during due diligence, he said. 3 weeks ago. And you still gave me the folder, Karen said. Offer. And the 3 o'clock meeting. Yes, Ryan said, and looked at him steadily. Why? If you already knew that the management company was behind the original structure, why'd come to me like I'm the one who has to reckon with it? Because you do, Ryan said. Knowing the origin doesn't change what you did with it. Philip gave you a structure. You built a culture on top of it that went beyond anything in that original proposal. The refrigerator fine wasn't in Philip's documents. Sandwich board wasn't in Philip's documents. He held her gaze. You have real responsibility here. But you're not the only person who does. I need to have the full picture before we talked about what comes next. Karen was quiet for a long moment. Philip is going to face consequences, she said. From your end. Philip's company is facing a legal review, Ryan said. My primary concern right now. The tenants here are my primary concern. Karen nodded. She looked at the accountability standards document still open in front of her. Looked at it differently now, not as a set of constraints on her authority, as a map, a description of what it would look like to do this work the way it was supposed to be done. Turned back to page 3. She kept reading. Ryan watched her read. He had dealt with a lot of people in a lot of difficult situations, property disputes, issues, complications, business partners who turned out to be something other than what they presented. He had learned over 14 years of building things will generally fall into one of two categories when the ground shifts under them. Some people grab for whatever they can reach. They blame. They deflect. They construct new versions of the story that protect themselves at any cost. There's fewer of them, but they exist, go still. They look at the damage. They sit with what they've done. Or they pick up whatever is in front of them and start trying to repair it. He had not been sure this morning in the parking lot which kind Karen Whitmore was. He was starting to think he knew. She reached the page of the accountability standards document. A page she had come to in the folder this morning, the page that said, this is where you come in. Accountability standards document had a corresponding version of that line at the bottom. It said, the question is not who you have been. It is who you intend to be from here. Karen read it. She set the document down. I want to talk to the tenants, she said, as part of a formal remediation process, not with lawyers present. I want to talk to them as myself. She paused. I want to apologize. Properly, without the management company's language and without the liability framework and without anyone coaching me on what I can and can't admit. She looked at Ryan. Will you let me do that before anything formal happens? Ryan looked at her. Thus, he said. All of them, Karen said, including Marcus Webb. Something shifted in Ryan's expression, almost imperceptibly, but Karen saw it. You know about the expansion unit, she said. A question. Marcus told me this afternoon, Ryan said, and looked at the desk between them. I told him that unit was committed to another tenant, she said. Then I told him that because she stopped. Heard again. Because Marcus had never been afraid of me. First day I came to this property, he treated me with the same straightforward respect he gave everyone. And he never once looked like he was worried about what I might do. And I found that she stopped again. Threatening? Ryan said quietly. Plus, Karen said. The word came out smaller than she intended. Threatening. So I found a way to take something from him. She looked up That had nothing to do with Philip's policies. That was me. The room was very quiet. Oh, Ryan said. Is there anything I can do about the expansion? Karen said. Late? No, Ryan said. It's not too late. Karen exhaled. A long, slow breath, the kind that a person releases when they have been holding something for much longer than one conversation. She said. Okay, Ryan said. He slid a pen across the desk. Well, Karen looked at it, then at the accountability standards document. Then she picked up the pen. She initialed the bottom of each page the way she had initialed hundreds of documents over years at this property, but this time with a feeling so different from all those other times that it was almost like a different physical act entirely. Authority, accountability. The pen moved across the paper. Outside, the afternoon was moving toward evening. Plaza was winding down the repair bays, quieting cafe in its final hour of service, the parts supply floor going through its end-of-day count, inertially mechanics of people finishing their work and heading home. Brick was leaning against the wall near the dealership entrance when Karen came out. He straightened when he saw her. She stopped. They looked at each other. Compressor, Karen said. How long had it been leaking? Brick considered whether the question deserved a straight answer. But it did. Best estimate? Since March, he said. But maybe April. There was a maintenance request, Karen said. Just 3 of them, Brick said. Karen nodded. Acknowledgement of a person who has stopped disputing things that are simply true. Thank you for fixing it, she said. Brick looked at her for a moment. He nodded once, a single clean nod that was neither warm nor cold, but simply real. What we do, he said. Karen walked toward her office, halfway across the lot. She passed Jimmy Tran, who was locking up his shop. Her coming, and there was that automatic tightening, old animal, caution, and then something else. Something new that hadn't been there this morning before she'd come to his shop and sat on his stool and listened. Well, Karen, he said. Jimmy, she said, I meant what I said this morning. I know, he said. I know you did. She kept walking. Behind her, the custom Harley caught the last of the afternoon light. Threw it long and golden across the parking lot, the way September light in Arizona does when it's doing its best work. Inside the dealership, Ryan was already on the phone. Calling Marcus Webb. The unit is yours, he said, when Marcus picked up. As soon as the paperwork is ready, letters, which, given that it's been sitting empty for 3 months, like to be as soon as possible. A silence on the other end. Marcus Webb said, does Sandra know yet? Because she's been telling me for 2 years to expand, and she's going to be insufferable about being right. Ryan laughed. There's the first real laugh of the whole complicated day. Not yet, he said. You can tell her. Oh, I will, Marcus said. Believe me, I absolutely will. Ryan hung up. He leaned back in his chair. Outside the window. Cedar Ridge was doing what small towns do, at the end of a day settling into itself, getting quieter, becoming the thing it actually was beneath all the noise and friction of the hours that had passed. About what the property would look like in 6 months. And there's a year, with an operations layer that served the tenants instead of feeding on them. Marcus's expanded shop, bringing more traffic to the plaza. With Eddie's compressor running clean, and Sandra's sandwich board back on the sidewalk, and Jimmy's refrigerator finally fully repaired. He thought about Karen. He wasn't sure about Karen. He had made the right call. He thought there was something real in what she had shown him today in the decision to go to those 3 shops. She had sat with Derek Walsh's information. Instead of weaponizing it immediately, the way she had said, I want to apologize properly without any lawyerly qualification on it. He knew that a hard day wasn't a transformation. The morning of honesty didn't undo 7 years of the other thing. It was a beginning. And Ryan Callahan had been in the business of beginnings long enough to know that you couldn't always tell at the start how the story was going to go. You just had to watch what people did. After day, small decision after small decision was where character actually lived, not in the dramatic moments, in the ordinary ones. He picked up the folder Marcus had given him, the one containing the 2-year-old expansion proposal that Marcus had written out longhand at his kitchen table and never gotten a fair hearing on. Reading, it was good, It was really genuinely good. He reached for a pen. He had notes. The morning after the 3 o'clock meeting, Mr. Whitmore arrived at Silver Creek Auto Plaza at 7:35, not 7:42, the way she had arrived every morning for 7 years. In her pearl white SUV parked in the spot closest to the main office that everyone understood was hers and only hers. Arrived at 7:35. She parked in the second row. She carried no clipboard. She was wearing a blazer. Some habits die slowly, but she had left the tablet case in her car. She walked to Sandra's cafe first. Sandra was alone behind the counter. First rush not yet started, restocking the pastry case with the focused, practiced movement of someone who has done the same task so many times it has become meditative. She heard the door and looked up, and the automatic wariness that crossed her face when she saw Karen was something Karen had decided the night before she was going to have to learn to accept the consequence of what she had built. Karen said, "Do you have a few minutes?" Sandra looked at her, at the pastry case, then back at Karen. "I have pastries to finish," she said. "No, wait," Karen said. Sandra studied her for another moment. She jerked her chin at the corner table, the one by the window, and a hanging plant, and the framed photograph of her grandmother. Thus, Sandra said. "I'll bring coffee." Karen sat. Sandra finished the pastry case. She poured 2 cups of coffee from the good pot, not the warming pot, and brought them to the table and sat down across from Karen with the expression of a woman who has been in difficult conversations before and knows that the only way through them is straight. "You apologized yesterday," Sandra said, "and I appreciated it. That wasn't the real apology, was it?" "That was the beginning of one." Karen looked at her coffee cup. "No," she said, "it wasn't the real one. So say the real one," Sandra said. "Sure." Without cruelty. Karen looked up. "I made you feel like you were borrowing space in someone else's kingdom," Karen said. "I did that deliberately. Not the sandwich board specifically. Yes, the sandwich board. But that was just the mechanism. What I was doing was making sure you knew that your security here depended on my goodwill." She paused. It was wrong. It was wrong in a way that goes past the policy violations and the fine amounts and the legal questions. It was wrong because you had built something real here, something that people in this town actually needed. I used it as leverage. She stopped. "I'm sorry, Sarah, for all of it from the beginning." Sandra sat across from her and was quiet for a long moment, wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "You know what the worst part was?" Sandra said. "It wasn't the money. The $250 was bad. Don't get me wrong. I'd had worse months than that. The worst part was that I stopped putting new things outside. New specials, new boards. I had this idea for a community menu board where I could post what local businesses were running for the week, connect people, like a little neighborhood bulletin. I thought about it for a year and never did it because I didn't want to give you a reason to come in." She looked at Karen directly. "I made myself smaller because of you. That's the part I'm still working on forgiving." Karen held that. Didn't defend against it. Didn't contextualize it. Just held it. The way a person holds something hot, not comfortable. "Necessary." "The community board," Karen said. "You should do it." Sandra looked at her. "Ryan has already said yes to anything that improves tenant visibility," Karen said. "No, because I helped draft the new operations guidelines last night. Any bulletin boards, sidewalk displays, exterior signage, all of it is now at tenant discretion within basic safety parameters. Approval process for a chalkboard." She paused. "You should do the board, Sandra. It's a good idea." Sandra looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "How do you take your coffee?" Karen blinked. "Back," she said. Sandra got up, went back behind the counter, and came back with a fresh cup from the good pot. She set it down in front of Karen. She sat. And for the next 40 minutes, while Cedar Ridge woke up around them, talked not about fines or policies or legal remediation, talked about Sandra's grandmother and why she'd opened the cafe in the first place, how her regular customers had carried her through the worst months of COVID when she'd done takeout only, and half the time she was running at a loss just so people would have somewhere that felt normal. The community board idea, which turned out to be considerably more developed then a vague notion Sandra had sketches, layouts, a whole plan for how it would work and who she'd invite to participate. Karen listened to all of it. She said very little. What she said, she meant. And Sandra, who had an excellent ear for the difference between managed communication and honest speech, heard the difference. When Karen left, Sandra stood in her cafe doorway and watched her cross the parking lot toward Jimmy's shop. Then she went back inside and pulled out her sketchbook. Well, she had a community board to design. Jimmy's reaction was different from Sandra's. Jimmy was not a man who sat with things. He was a man who decided quickly and moved forward and did not, as a general rule, look backward at things he had already decided about. He had decided the morning Karen had called him and asked to come by that she was doing something real. He didn't know yet how far it would go. He had decided the thing was real, and once Jimmy Tran decided something, it was decided. So when Karen came in at 8:30 and sat on the stool again and said the real apology, the fuller one, the management language, without the careful, professional phrasing, Jimmy listened at it and said, $400, cash or check? Karen stared at him. The refund, Jimmy said. Ryan's team said the management company is processing refunds for all the contested fines. Asking if it's cash or check, because I already know what I'm doing with it. Check? I think Karen said, still processing the pivot from the management company's liability coverage. Good, Jimmy said. I'm buying a new refrigerator. The one I've got is on its last legs. He said it without meanness. They're fact. That's a good use of it, Karen said. Jimmy looked at her with the direct, no-nonsense assessment of a man who cuts bread for a living and has learned that the quality of a thing is evident in what it does under pressure. And he said, I've been here 4 years. In those 4 years, you made my life harder than it needed to be. That's real. Ask me real things, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. He leaned on the counter. I've also been watching this morning since 6 o'clock. You park in the second row. I saw you go to Sandra's first. I see you here now. He paused. People don't change because they get caught. Some of them do. Most don't, but some do. He studied her. You're trying. I am, Karen said. Then try harder, Jimmy said. Every day. That's all I've got. He turned back to his bread. Karen sat on the stool for another moment, watching him work. Just confident movement of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and why it mattered. Then she got up. The bread smells incredible, she said. Always did, Jimmy said, without looking up. But the corner of his mouth moved, as though Garza was the hardest. Because Eddie was angrier than the others, he wasn't. Particularly, Eddie was the kind of man who processed things through work. By the time Karen arrived at his bay at 9:15, already been under 3 different vehicles and was now sitting on an overturned bucket, drinking from a water bottle and looking at something on his phone. Perked up when Karen came in. Compressor sounds good, Karen said. Eddie said. Brick knows what he's doing. Silence. Or didn't sit. There was nowhere to sit that wasn't a piece of automotive equipment. She stood. Eddie, she said, I owe you an apology that goes further than what I said yesterday. You don't have to do this, Eddie said. I know I don't have to, Karen said. That's why I'm doing it. Eddie looked at her. Then he looked back at his phone. Then he set it down on the bucket beside him. I'll stay fine, he said. That was the one that really got me. I had been here 7 years at that point. 7 years of paying on time, keeping my bay clean by any reasonable standard, they're once causing a problem. And you came in and fined me for oil stains. He looked up. A repair shop. I know, Karen said. Do you know why that one specifically? Eddie said. The money. The principle of it. Do you know what it said to me? What? Karen said. It said that nothing I had done for 7 years counted for anything, Eddie said. My track record meant nothing, that I was just a revenue source. In a ledger, he paused. I've worked with my hands my whole life. He worked with his hands. His father before him. There's dignity in that. Real dignity. And that fine said the dignity didn't matter. Karen stood in Eddie Garza's repair bay and took it without flinching. Right, she said. That's exactly what it communicated. It was wrong. The fine was wrong. The policy was wrong. The way I implemented it was wrong. and the respect you were owed that I failed to give you. I can't give back the years of it. I can tell you it was real. The work you do here is real, and it matters, and I should have known that from the beginning. Eddie was quiet for a long time. He picked up his water bottle, took a long drink, set it down. My kid is 17, he said. He comes in on weekends sometimes, helps me out, loves it. He looked at the bay around him at the tools, the equipment, the organized complexity of a working mechanics world. I've been thinking about whether to hand this to him someday, whether it's worth handing on, given everything. He looked at Karen. Almost made me decide it wasn't. Karen felt that land in the way it was meant to land. Almost, she said. Almost, Eddie said. Because Ryan came in yesterday afternoon and spent 20 minutes watching Danny. That's my son watching him work. Some questions took him seriously. He paused. A man who runs properties across this whole state took 20 minutes to talk to a 17-year-old about torque settings. He shook his head. That's what this place should have been. That's what I should have had for 7 years. Yes, Karen said. Have been. Eddie stood up. He was a big man, and standing brought him to his full height, and he looked at Karen from that height with an expression that was not forgiveness, but was the thing that sometimes comes before it, thing of the ground where forgiveness eventually grows. They accept your apology, he said. You're going to have to prove the rest of it over time. I know, Karen said. Pick up a wrench. Bring your car in sometime, he said. I'll check your oil. It was not a warm invitation. It was a functional one. The kind of gesture that says, willing to exist in a world where we are both real to each other. As Karen understood more than she had given him for 7 years. Oh, she said. She walked out of the bay. She was halfway across the parking lot when her phone rang. Philip Hayes, she answered. Karen, he said. I need you to come to a call at 10 o'clock. The management company's legal team, myself, and 2 of the board members. A pause. They've been briefed on the situation. They want to discuss the liability exposure. What kind of discussion? Karen said. I'm going to ask you to sign a statement taking responsibility for the fine structure, Philip said. His voice was tight, carefully controlled. The voice of a man standing in a burning building trying to sound like everything was fine, framing it as individual operational decisions that fell outside the approved management guidelines. Karen stopped walking. Philip, she said, you know that's not accurate. Karen, the policy addenda were encouraged by you and the management company from my first week, Karen said. They have the emails. I saved them. Philip, I always save everything you know that about me. That was one of the things you said you valued about my management style. She paused. I have the emails. The silence on Philip's end was the silence of a carefully constructed narrative developing a significant structural crack. I understand you feel, he started. I'm going to be on the 10 o'clock call, Karen said. And I'm going to tell them the truth, which is that this was a management company initiative that I implemented without sufficient ethical scrutiny and without pushing back the way I should have. I bear responsibility for what I chose to do with the structure I was given, and that I am not the only person in this situation who bears responsibility. She paused. I suggest you think about what you're going to very carefully before 10 o'clock. She ended the call. She stood in the parking lot. Her heart was going faster than she was going to let anyone know. At the dealership, Ryan's custom Harley was there. Oh, solid. The kind of thing that doesn't move until its owner decides to move it. A breath. She walked to the dealership. Teresa looked up when she came in. Unavailable, Karen said. He's on a call, Teresa said. He'll be 5 minutes. Karen nodded. She stood near the window, at the plaza. From here she could see Sandra's cafe. She could see Eddie's bay. She could see the corner of Jimmy's shop, and the beginnings of what she was fairly certain was a chalk sandwich board being positioned outside the door. I'd see Marcus Webb's shop, and next to it, the empty unit. The one that was going to stop being empty very soon. She had been looking at this view for 7 years. She had never actually seen it, not the way she was seeing it now. Cafe was a woman who had come from somewhere else and built a gathering place and made her grandmother's recipes available to a small Arizona town and called it a business. Her bay was a family trade, a father's hands, and soon a son's. The sandwich shop was an immigrant's dream, converted into carbohydrates and community. That supply was 19 years of institutional memory and expertise and loyalty to a place that had not, for most of those years, deserved it. These were not tenants. These were people. Ryan came out of his office. He saw her expression. "What happened?" he said. "Philip is going to try to make me the scapegoat," Karen said. 1 o'clock call. The management company's board. Ryan nodded slowly. "Oh, I know about the call," he said. Karen looked at him. "A legal team received the same meeting invitation," Ryan said. "They copied on all management company correspondence since the acquisition." He paused. "And I've already submitted the policy correspondence to the company's board directly." Between Philip and the former management team from 7 years ago. Learned the original policy proposal. He looked at her steadily. Philip is not going to be able to reframe this as a rogue operations manager. Karen was quiet for a moment. "Sir, you've been ahead of this the whole time," she said. "I do my homework," Ryan said. "And you still gave me the offer," Karen said. Philip was going to try. "Yes. Why?" Ryan looked out the window at the plaza. "What Philip did and what you did are two different things," he said. "Philip engineered a system to extract money from people who couldn't fight back, and then he hired someone to implement it, and then he planned to hide behind that person when it unraveled." He looked back at Karen. "But what you did was you let the power become the thing. You started with a structure someone else handed you, and you built a whole identity around it. That's different. It's still wrong, but it's different." Karen thought about the kitchen table where her mother used to change the rules without warning. The years she had spent making sure no one would ever have that kind of power over her again. The fact that in running from that, she had become it. "Philip should have told you what Derek Walsh told you," Ryan said. "You ever took the job. He owed you that information and he withheld it because it was more convenient to have someone implement his system than to explain what the system actually was." "But I still implemented it," Karen said. Ryan said, "You did. No comfort, no softening. Just the flat, honest truth of it. And somehow that was more respectful than anything softer would have been." 1 o'clock call, Karen said. "What should I say?" "The truth," Ryan said. "All of it, including the parts that are hard for you. Philip's team is going to try to position this as a management failure at the property level. Your job on that call is to be the one person in the room who refuses to let anyone hide behind anything." He paused. "Can you do that?" Karen thought about Sandra's grandmother, framing a photograph on a cafe wall, about Marcus Webb's expansion that had been a year in the planning and 2 years in the withholding. A 17-year-old kid named Danny learning his father's trade on weekends and growing up in a world where either that trade was worth something or it wasn't. "But," she said. "Good," Ryan said. His phone buzzed. "Sir." He looked at it. Something shifted in his expression, something quick and then controlled. "What?" Karen said. He looked up. "There's someone here," he said. "Someone I wasn't expecting." He walked toward the showroom entrance. And followed, because something in his voice made following feel like the only reasonable response. And just inside the dealership entrance was a man Karen had never seen before. He was in his early 60s, wearing a plain button-down shirt and slacks, holding a hat in both hands the way people hold hats when they are trying to convey that they come without agenda. The look of a man who had driven a long way and was choosing his words very carefully. Ryan stopped when he saw him. "Mr. DiMaggio," he said. Frank DiMaggio, the former owner of Silver Creek Auto Plaza, then felt the room rearrange itself for the third time in as many days. At Ryan, then at Karen, then back at Ryan. "What happened?" Frank said. "Word got to me yesterday. The tow truck, about the meeting, about all of it." He turned his hat in his hands. "I drove up this morning because there are things I should have said before I sold this property, and I didn't say them, and I need to say them now." Ryan gestured toward the office. "Men," he said. They went in, all three of them. Ryan closed the door. Frank sat down without being invited, the way a man sits when he has been carrying something for a long time, and the sitting down is as much about setting the weight down as anything else. He said. He looked at her directly. "I owe you an apology." Karen stared at him. I knew for at least 2 years that the situation here was wrong, Frank said. I had letters from tenants. I had Marcus Webb come talk to me in person 18 months ago, drove to my house, at my kitchen table, laid out the whole pattern. I didn't do anything. He stopped, started again. I told myself it was the management company's responsibility. I told myself you were operating within the guidelines they had given you. I told myself a lot of things that made it easier to not have a conversation that would have been uncomfortable. He looked at his hat. Expansion unit, he said. Marcus's expansion. I didn't know Karen had told him it was committed. Didn't know until Marcus told me in person 18 months ago. When he told me, I asked my manager about it, and Karen, told me it had been a miscommunication, a misread of the lease records. I believed her. He looked up. I shouldn't have. Karen said nothing. I should have dug further, Frank said. I should have asked more questions. I should have had the property management company audited 2 years before I did. Oh, I should have told you clearly what standards I expected and checked whether they were being met, instead of assuming that Philip Hayes and his company were handling it correctly. He set the hat on his knee. On part of what happened here, I need you both to know that. Ryan looked at him. Frank, he said, I appreciate you coming. Genuinely, I need to ask you something directly. Ask, Frank said. Philip Hayes' company is going to be on a call-in. Ryan checked the clock, 42 minutes. Going to try to contain the liability exposure by pushing it down to the operations management level. Are you willing to be on that call? Frank looked at him. He said, without hesitation. And are you willing to speak to what you knew and when you knew it? A pause this time, better than it should have been if the answer was going to be no. False. Frank said, I am. Ryan looked at Karen. Karen looked at Frank DiMaggio. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then Karen said, Mr. DiMaggio, the expansion unit, Marcus Webb's proposal from 2 years ago. Ryan has already offered to move forward on it. She paused. I think it would mean something to Marcus if you called him. Oh, before you get on that 10 o'clock call, before any of the official stuff, call him. As a person. Frank looked at her. He studied her the way a person studies something they are genuinely trying to understand. All right, he said. I'll do that. He took out his phone, looked at Ryan. Ryan read the room correctly and stood. We'll give you a few minutes, he said. He and Karen stepped out of the office and into the showroom. They stood near the window. Outside, Sandra's community board was going up. I could see it from here. Sandra and Jimmy, both currently working on it together. Sandra positioning the board while Jimmy held the other side, and they argued cheerfully about the height. On his own, Karen said. Yes, Ryan said. No, Ryan said. I didn't. Karen watched Sandra and Jimmy disagree about the board height. They're moving fast, she said. They were moving for a long time, Ryan said. Morning, they just stopped, pretending they weren't. Karen looked at him. 10 o'clock call, she said. After I'm done, after the call is done, and whatever comes out of it comes out, I want to start on the tenant files. All of them. Not the remediation paperwork. The actual files. I want to know every person in this plaza, what they need, what they've been asking for, what they stopped asking for because they were afraid of the answer. She paused. I want to start. Ryan looked at her. That's the job, he said. That's exactly the job. I know, Karen said. Them through the office door. They could hear Frank DiMaggio's voice. The call, careful. The voice of a man in his 60s making a phone call he should have made 2 years ago. That Sandra finally won the argument about the board height. Jimmy threw his hands up in good-natured defeat and stepped back, and Sandra positioned the board. And they both looked at it for a moment. And then Sandra said something that made Jimmy laugh. And Jimmy's laugh was the kind that you could hear from 20 feet away without trying. And heard it through the glass. She hadn't heard that sound in 4 years at this property. She hadn't known it was missing until it was there. 10 o'clock call lasted 1 hour and 17 minutes. Philip Hayes arrived on it, already managing a narrative. His opening statement was 5 minutes of carefully calibrated language about operational inconsistencies at the property level and individual management decisions that fell outside approved guidelines and the company's commitment to working. Constructively with all affected parties. Karen let him finish. Then she spoke for 6 minutes without notes. She described the policy addenda and their origin. She cited specific email dates. She named specific conversations. She was precise, and she was thorough, and she was unflinching. And when she got to the part where she acknowledged her own responsibility, when she saw qualification and without qualification that she had implemented and expanded the system beyond what even the management company had designed, she had made it personal in ways that reflected her own failures rather than anyone else's intentions. She said that too. Deflection, without the passive language of institutional blame sharing. When she finished, there was a silence on the call. Frank DiMaggio, who had joined 15 minutes in, then spoke for 4 minutes about what he had known and when he had known it and what he had failed to do about it. After Frank spoke, Philip Hayes said very little. Ryan's legal team said even less. They didn't need to. After the call, Karen sat in her office, the same office where she had stared at her computer screen 24 hours earlier, a parking lot on a loop, and she felt something she was having trouble naming. Relief, not exactly. Something more like the feeling after a very long fever breaks. Body still weak, the world still complicated, but the falseness gone. The pretending over. The particular exhaustion of maintaining a story that wasn't true, finally allowed to set down. Phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Edit. Karen, this is Marcus Webb. Frank called me. You said to him, but I know you're the reason he called. Oh. She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the desk, the way she had set it face down 24 hours ago when the world was a different shape, but differently this time. Not because she was avoiding something. Because some things are worth sitting with in silence for a moment before the next thing begins. She sat. She let the moment be what it was. Then she opened the tenant files, with the first one. She started at the beginning. Well, she had a lot of work to do. 6 months later, Marcus Webb opened his expanded shop on a Tuesday morning in March. He didn't make a big announcement. He didn't send a press release. He just unlocked the door to the unit that had been empty for 3 months. When Ryan bought the property, the unit that Karen had told him 2 years ago was already committed to another tenant, and he propped it open with the same brake rotor he'd been using to prop his office door open for the last decade, and he went to work. But Cedar Ridge found out anyway. Plus, because Sandra told her breakfast customers. Because Jimmy told the mechanics who came in for lunch. Because Eddie Garza told every vehicle owner who sat in his waiting area that morning. And because word in a small town travels the way water travels, not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably, finding every crack and channel until it reaches everywhere. By 9 o'clock, Marcus had 3 people inside the new space who weren't there to buy parts. They were just there, looking around, congratulating him. They're shaking his hand with the particular warmth that people reserve for things they have been rooting for from a distance and are genuinely glad to see happen. Marcus's son, a 24-year-old named Darius, who had his father's hands and his mother's eyes and had been working at the shop part-time since he was 16, was behind the counter of the new unit looking slightly overwhelmed and deeply proud. Then came by at 9:30. He didn't stay long. He shook Marcus's hand around the expanded space, said, "This is exactly right," in the quiet voice he used when he meant something completely. They left. Marcus watched him go. "That's your landlord?" Darius said. "That's my landlord," Marcus said. Darius thought about that for a moment. "Like a decent man he is," Marcus said. Hold on to that. Decent men who actually do something with it are rarer than you'd think. Karen was there too. Arrived after Ryan left, which was not an accident. She understood, with the particular social intelligence she had always possessed, but had spent years pointing in the wrong direction. This was Marcus's morning, and that her presence needed to be small enough not to crowd it. She stayed 5 minutes. She looked at Darius behind the counter and said, "Your dad talked about building this for a long time." Rad. She looked at Marcus. "Congratulations." Then she left. Marcus looked at the door after she closed it. Darius said, "That?" Marcus considered how to answer that question honestly. One who got it wrong for a long time. he said, is working very hard to get it right. Darius nodded like that made sense. As it did. Philip Hayes resigned from the management company 11 weeks after the 10 o'clock call. The official statement cited a desire to pursue other opportunities. The unofficial version, which made its way through the industry channels the way these things always do, was more specific. The management company's board had conducted an internal review of the Silver Creek situation and several other properties in their portfolio, a pattern of fee structures that were at minimum ethically questionable and at maximum legally indefensible, and had decided that the cleanest path forward involved significant personnel changes at the regional director level. Called Karen, the morning his resignation became public. She answered, "I want you to know," he said, "that I don't blame you for what you said on that call." Karen held the phone and listened. "I made decisions," Philip said. "Going back further than Silver Creek, I made decisions that I told myself were good business and that were not." He stopped. "Not sure what I'm going to do next, but I wanted to call you." Karen thought about what to say. About Derek Walsh, who had been where she was 7 years ago and had made a different choice, had refused the thing and walked away and spent 7 years with a guilt he hadn't earned and a silence he shouldn't have kept. About Sandra's grandmother in the photograph, Marcus's son, Darius, behind the counter of a space that had been withheld for 2 years. "Look," she said, "whatever you do next, do it differently." A long silence. "There's," he said, "I intend to." He hung up. Karen sat at her desk, the same office, but nothing else the same about the situation. And she thought about the call for about 60 seconds. Then she went back to the tenant files because she had 12 active follow-up items and a meeting with Ryan's team at 2 o'clock to discuss the summer improvement plan. The work did not pause because other things were also happening. First, that was something she had learned in 6 months. The work doesn't pause. It just becomes different work depending on what you're pointing it at. She had been pointing it at the right things for 6 months now. Some days it was easier than others. Some days the old habits pulled hard, the impulse to assert control when something felt uncertain, the reflex to find the policy lever instead of the human solution, deep-grooved instinct to make herself large when she felt small. She had started seeing a therapist in November, a practical woman in Scottsdale, who had spent the first 3 sessions listening to Karen describe her management philosophy, and then had said, with the bluntness of someone with nothing to sell, "You've been managing other people's anxiety by creating it. When did you stop being able to tolerate your own?" Karen had thought about her mother's kitchen table, rules that changed without warning, about the specific old terror of having no ground to stand on. "A long time ago," she said. The therapist nodded. "Let's start there." On a Saturday morning in late March, the same kind of clear Arizona morning that had started everything 6 months prior, Karen arrived at Silver Creek Auto Plaza at 7:30 and found Ryan already there on the front steps of the dealership with a cup of coffee. "Wake up." She almost walked past. Then she stopped. She sat down next to him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Plaza was doing what it did every morning, opening, warming, filling with the sounds and smells of people starting work. Sandra's cafe sending out the coffee smell, the distant sound of a bay door rolling up. There's Marcus's shop, both units now, lights coming on. "How's Danny doing?" Karen said. Peed. Eddie's son, who had apparently been in the shop every weekend since Ryan had spent 20 minutes talking Torx settings with. "Well, Eddie says he's thinking about a trade certification program," Ryan said. "Oh," Karen nodded. "Sandra's community board," she said. "But did you see what she added this week?" "The free breakfast program," Ryan said. "The mechanics who start before the cafe opens." "She's been doing it quietly for 3 weeks," Karen said. "I only found out because Jimmy mentioned it." Ryan smiled. Surprised, just pleased. "That's Sandra," he said. "Not for another moment, Ryan," Karen said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right," he said. 6 months ago in the parking lot when I was trying to have your motorcycle towed, what were you thinking?" Ryan looked out at the plaza. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that I had seen this before. A person who had confused access with authority. And I was thinking that it was going to complicate my morning. He paused. And I was thinking that the way someone responds when the ground shifts under them tells you everything you need to know about who they actually are. And what did I tell you? Karen said. Looked at her directly that morning. Not enough to be sure. He held her gaze. After that quite a lot. Karen looked at her hands. I spent a long time being afraid, she said. And I made other people small so I could feel safe. I don't know how to fully make that right. I don't know if fully making it right is something you can actually do, or if you just keep doing better and hope that counts for something. Ryan was quiet for a moment. I think you keep doing better, he said. And I think it counts. Not because it erases anything, but because the people hear Jimmy, Deborah, Eddie Marcus. They're not looking for erasure. They're looking for a place that's actually on their side. He looked at the plaza. Well, you can be that. You already are starting to be that. Karen sat with that. Morning moved around them. A car pulled into the lot. There's Jimmy's sandwich shop door opened. Sandra stepped outside and adjusted her community board, still tweaking it, improving it, the way good people do, with the things they care about. There's something else, Ryan said. Karen looked at him. Hell's Angels, Chapter, Brick and Sal, and the others, they're organizing something for next month. Free repair day for families in Cedar Ridge who can't afford maintenance. Their parents, elderly people, fixed-income households. Eddie's already agreed to anchor it. They want to use the plaza. Karen looked at him. They're asking if you'll coordinate it, Ryan said. Logistics, outreach, communications. Brick specifically requested you. Karen stared. Brick requested me, he said. And I'm quoting directly. She knows every corner of that property, and she actually follows through on things. Use her. Ryan looked at her with something that might have been amusement. Coming from Brick, that is a significant endorsement. Karen thought about Brick standing in her office doorway, 6 months ago, delivering a folder without a word of warmth. 3 o'clock, Ms. Whitmore, and walking out. Yes, Karen said. I figured, Ryan said. Picked up his coffee, looked out at Silver Creek Auto Plaza, at the shops and the bays and the cafe, and the expanded parts supply and the community board and the ordinary, essential, extraordinary machinery of people who had decided to build something and had been building it through every obstacle placed in their way. Of it, he looked at all of it. You know what this place needed? All along, he said. Karen looked up at him. Someone to actually see it, he said. He went inside. Karen sat on the steps alone. The March morning was doing its best work, the sky clear and enormous the way Arizona skies get when they're showing off. Air still cool enough to be pleasant, the day just beginning to find its shape. I came out of the cafe and saw Karen sitting there and waved back. From across the lot, Marcus Webb stepped out of his shop, both units open now, lights on, and raised his coffee cup in a small salute. Karen raised hers. And Eddie Garza, who had just rolled up his bay door and was standing at the threshold with a wrench in his hand, the way he always stood at the start of a day's work, across at her and gave her a single, clean nod. Not forgiveness. Not the wiping away of what had been. A rewrite of 7 years of things that could not be unwritten. That said, you are here. I see you. Keep going. Oh, Karen stood up. She straightened her blazer, still there. Her habit, but sitting differently on her now. The blazer of a woman who wore it because she was going to do real work, not because she needed to announce herself. She walked across the parking lot, past the spot where a tow truck had once arrived and left without its cargo, past the place where a custom black Harley had caught the early morning light and started everything, past the new community board and the cafe and the sounds of Eddie's Bay coming to life and the smell of Jimmy's bread and all of it, all of the small, living substance of Silver Creek Auto Plaza on a Tuesday morning in March. She had 7 follow-up items on her list. She had a free repair day to plan. She had 12 tenant files to finish reviewing. She had work to do. Work. The kind that builds something instead of diminishing it, and that leaves people more, not less. She went inside. Silver Creek Auto Plaza, which had spent 7 years under the shadow of a person trying to make herself feel safe, opened fully into the morning light, not because the shadow lifted on its own, but because the people inside it had kept building anyway. And because the right person finally came and saw what they had made, and because even the person who had cast the shadow had found her way to something truer than fear. That is what real power looks like. Not the clipboard, not the fine schedule, not the locked door, and the manufactured consequence. Open door, the repaired compressor, the community board, learning his father's trade on a Saturday. That smells like it always did, like something worth staying for. That is what lasts. That is what is real.